Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's educational event titled Sleep Research Career Pathways in Professional Societies, a panel discussion, sponsored by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine Foundation and co-sponsored by the Research Career Development Committee. This is part 4 of a 5-part webinar series planned for the duration of the year that will feature the different career pathways of diverse and successful sleep researchers in the sleep science enterprise. My name is Dr. Logan Schneider, Vice Chair of the AASM Foundation Research Career Development Committee. I will be the facilitator for today's webinar, which will be an enlightening discussion with 3 successful sleep researchers and leaders in the professional society spaces. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to remind you that your audio is muted and your video is off. We encourage you to include any questions on the topic for any of the panelists in the Q&A of the Zoom platform. Please refrain from using your cell phone and/or pager while you're on this webinar. Also, a recording of this webinar will be made available to all registrants. Now, allow me to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Nisha Arora is an associate professor of medicine at NYU Grossman School of Medicine in the Division of Pulmonary, Critical Care, and Sleep Medicine. Her research interests include examining cardiometabolic outcomes in sleep-disordered breathing with a focus on sex-specific differences. Dr. Arora has served on the AASM Foundation Board of Directors since June of 2017 and became president in June of 2023. She previously served on the AASM Board of Directors and is currently the chair for the AASM Guidelines Advisory Panel. Dr. Jennifer Martin is a clinical psychologist and professor of medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Her scientific research program focuses on improving sleep as a key component of maintaining and improving physical and mental health, particularly among women and older adults with sleep disorders. Dr. Martin has served on the AASM Foundation Board of Directors since June 2015, including being president of the AASM Foundation from June 2016 to June 2019. She also currently serves on the AASM Board of Directors as the immediate past president. Dr. Susan Redline is the Peter C. Farrell Professor of Sleep Medicine at Harvard Medical School, Professor of Epidemiology at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Director of the Programs in Sleep and Cardiovascular Medicine and Sleep Medicine Epidemiology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Her research interests are in elucidating the etiologies of sleep disorders in both adults and children, including the role of genetic and early life developmental factors, and understanding the cardiovascular and other health outcomes of sleep disorders and the role of sleep interventions in improving health and well-being. She is a member of the World Sleep Society's International Sleep Research Training Program Steering Committee. Thank you for joining us, Drs. Arora, Martin, and Redline. Let's start with a question to get to know you. So I have given an introduction, but I'm sure that you have means of introducing yourself that would enlighten us about your role as well as how you've gotten here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your current or most recent roles in professional societies. So whoever wants to kick it off can start.
I'd be happy to start. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here, especially with 2 of my favorite esteemed colleagues, Jennifer and Susan. So my current role is foundation president, and my pathway in terms of professional societies and the pathway I got to be here is through the guidelines committee. So being involved in evidence-based practices within sleep medicine has been my path, and I continue to have that passion. And we're doing great work on the board side as well as the foundation side to make those guidelines and to recognize gaps. So that is kind of in a nutshell how I got involved with the board and the foundation.
Great. High impact that endures. Dr. Redline, would you like to go?
Oh, sure. I was hoping Jennifer would jump in, but and I share the prior comments. It's really an honor to be with, this fantastic panel. And I think, too, I hope the participants in the workshop appreciate how over the course of the hour, what we have in common, meaning our passion for training and for the field, but actually our diversity too, in terms of the roads and the different ways we developed our career and got to this particular point. So I've been for many years involved with the Academy, and with the SRS, with some patient advocacy groups, and even and with the World Sleep Organization, which I'll talk about later. And actually, most recently, I just joined the board of the National Sleep Foundation. So I'm pretty promiscuous in sort of my relationships with these various organizations, but I think it reflects kind of my commitment that, as someone in the sleep field, we have to work from multiple different areas and really engage the strengths and the interests of the various organizations that are promoting sleep health, promoting research, promoting public health, and engaging patients. So I guess that's sort of a little bit way of introduction, in that I try to help when I can, and work within these different societies, specifically, I guess, with a focus on some of the public health issues, but also connecting the research that we do with maybe translation into guidelines and public policy, and then finally making sure that that new generation or younger generation of researchers are ready to replace us.
Thanks, Susan. I was trying to get the virtual background thing figured out, and you can see I got halfway there because it's backwards.
Oh, it's forward for us. You're good. You
It's
got
okay.
it.
Okay, good.
It's perfect.
I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I also want to reflect on how fun it is to be here with the two of you. My current position is that I'm actually in my last year on the AASM board, serving as the immediate past president. My pathway to getting here, I was thinking about it in advance of this call, and really goes all the way back to serving as a member of the SRS's Trainee Day Planning Committee a really long time ago. And I think I started to appreciate, as Susan suggested, the impact you can have when you volunteer, but also how much fun it is to learn from your colleagues through that process. So from there, I was involved with the SRS for a number of years. And then I think the AASM was really interested in growing and expanding the foundation, which is how we're all here today, and was lucky enough to be on the board at the time. So I served as the foundation president for 3 years, and then transitioned into a leadership role for the AASM itself. I have also been on the board of directors of the our local VA research nonprofit, which has been a really interesting experience. And again, I feel like another way to give back and learn. I think that my pathway to getting here is very closely linked to my enthusiasm for sleep science. That's kind of, I think, what it gets down to, and really wanting to feel like I wanted not just to do my own work, but to help build the field. And as Susan suggested, make sure that there's, a good foundation for people entering the field.
Great. Well, I love the dedication to building the field and having a place for the next generation to then continue the legacy work. It's great. Actually, to play on one of the things that Dr. Redline raised, the fact that you're unlikely to be just involved in one professional society, and for Dr. Redline, quite a few. And I'm sure that over your time, as you mentioned, that you've gone through different roles in different societies. Can you highlight key differences in how you spend your time in a position in an academic and or clinical role versus the time that you have to dedicate to professional societies, which may not fit directly into your FTE?
Wow, that's a tough question, because it actually goes to so many of the things we do, even going beyond societies, is how do you fit all the different, all your passions and all your commitments within your a 24-hour day, and along with having to get your work done and pay the bills, so to speak. So I guess the way I would sort of, and I think the answer is going to differ a lot according to your background. If you're, do a lot of clinical work, if you have a lot of administrative duties. So I think that juggling and making time it's very hard to generalize about. But I would say the one thing that can be that I think can be very useful is when you decide to make time in your calendar for an activity like working on a society related event, ask how does it enhance the other aspects of what you do in your everyday job. So we heard Nisha, talking about guidelines. How does promoting guidelines potentially make you a better clinician or educator, for example? If I am involved with a paper, a meta-analysis or a systematic review, how does that enhance, because I do mostly research, how does that actually make me a better researcher? Because the two are going to be synergistic, because if I'm they're going to come back and forth. So I think that, because societies do many, many things, and there are some things that are not going to go to your skills or your interests. So you may not be able to make much of an impact, but the reverse is also true, that by being in those activities, that may not be able to, further enhance your strength as someone who is an expert in X, Y, or Z, or spends their time doing X, Y, and Z. So that's the way I try to think about things. How do those activities, do I really have something important to contribute, versus someone else? And if I do that, will that make me better in some way in something else that I do? I know that was pretty vague, but I'm sorry.
No, I thought it was great. I really appreciate the perspective on the complementarity going both ways. Really, not only does this add to my CV, but am I the right person for this role? I think that's something that I haven't often thought about, but certainly is useful. I'm not just filling a seat. I'm actually there to get something done. And can I actually help the society in that role? Any thoughts from our other panelists?
Yeah, I'm reflecting a little bit on what Susan said. I think one of the ways to balance it is not to say yes to everything. I think that it's a little bit of a challenge. And I a few years ago convinced myself that the only way to manage your calendar is with addition and subtraction. You can't do it with multiplication and division. There's only 24 hours in the day. So if you want to do something like this, be realistic about what you can not do as a result. The other thing I would say is this is work you do out of love. So if you think you're going to be able to count the exact number of hours that you're dedicating to your work life, it's hard to do that if you don't love the extra time you're putting in. For me, the experiences I've had with professional societies have been really rewarding and fun. And honestly, having a meeting at 7 o'clock Pacific time, but being on a call with a bunch of my good friends and colleagues makes it okay to start the workday earlier than I might normally, or I'm sure for folks on the East Coast, it's the other way around with things to do in the evenings from time to time. But if you love it, you don't mind, and you figure it out and you make it work. So that's the other piece. And then I think have reasonable expectations for what you can actually accomplish with the time that you're putting in. I think sometimes we volunteer for something and we think we're going to have a huge impact, and what we really need to do is a small thing very well. So I think being clear with yourself that if you're dedicating a certain amount of time to something, how much are you going to be able to achieve, so you don't feel like it's not rewarding, I guess. So being realistic. And then the other thing I would say is making sure that when you commit to something like this, that you follow it through all the way to the end. Because I think one of the challenges is we all do get busy, and we might miss a meeting from time to time, but organizations do rely on volunteers. So when you commit to something, make sure it's realistic within the parameters of your work life. Remember who your boss is. But like I said, it's really something you have to kind of do out of love. And I completely agree there are personal benefits, but if that's why you do it, I think it ends up being a lot more work than it's worth.
Great. Dr. Aurora, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with Jennifer about the point of this is something we do out of love. I think going back to the question of what are the key differences in how we spend our time in a professional society versus academia, one of the things that I've noticed on a day-to-day basis is that in your academic environment, your institutional environment, you really have to convince people on the importance of sleep. You have to convince people on why sleep is important clinically and needs to be part of the institutional agenda, which, amongst many things, cardiology, GI, all of these other specialties, you're really advocating for sleep at a local and boots on the ground level. I think what's really different in the way you spend your time in a professional society is everybody there, everybody you're interacting with gets the importance of sleep, loves sleep medicine, sleep science. So you really are looking at things from a very different lens. And it's just such a positive experience to be able to have a group of people and a network that gets that and wants to do the same things you want to do and has the same love and passion. So for me, I noticed that very, very important distinction of being in a multidisciplinary academic practice where there's endocrinologists and GI and cardiologists, and to be able to express the importance of sleep amongst all those folks versus a group that you just know loves sleep, gets it, and wants to really advance it in the same way you do.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I ask, you just reminded me of something. I really agree with what you said so much. And I wanted to say the other thing that I find really different, and I don't know if others find this too, is that most of the societies that I work with are super organized. They have business people and people with management skills, and they have a very clear strategic plan and budget and set of support staff. So often when you do that work, it's much more in maybe an organized framework that's actually better resourced than the usual academic environment. And there's actually some, it may be very conducive to be more efficient in those environments than your typical academic environment where you're struggling to find someone to assist you with X, Y, and Z, and the expectations are blurrier. So I think that's actually a big difference, and it actually can be very illuminating to see how a functional organizational structure works that isn't typical of a lot of our clinical and academic environments, I hate to say, at least in my experience. So sorry.
I think that's such a great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry.
And it makes us more nimble in a way.
Yeah. And to actually Dr. Redline's earlier point, one of the things that individuals can get out of this experience is that experience, right? We're not trained typically in our research or clinical capacities to be project or program managers. And as you mentioned, it's often sink or swim on your own, but learning those skills on how to manage your life and your portfolio of things can come out of seeing how it's done well in organizations that run it well. So that's a great example of the added benefit of contributing your time is seeing how it's done well. I know that I rely upon those folks who are currently off camera and are doing all of the hard work to have made this even possible every day, because we'll meet intermittently and then in between everything happens. It's amazing, right? So it truly is a sight to behold. Building upon some of the comments that all of you made, the words love and passion came up quite a number of times, and I think you had delved into some of the parts that really made it gratifying, but there are things that keep you going. Can you expound upon what it is that you get out of these experiences, the gratifying parts that keep you continuing to go back and investing your time and energy into these roles?
For me, it's this. I mean, you know, I alluded to this when I first came on the board, you know, this foundation was a teeny tiny little operation, and being a part of seeing something grow and turn into an incredible resource for career development in a field that I love so much, that makes me want to keep coming back. I think that being a part of something that's bigger than you or the place where you work every day can be really incredibly rewarding. So for me, it's that, you know, extending your impact beyond kind of your local little, you know, work tribe, and really seeing big impacts.
No doubt.
Yeah, so one of, you know, I think the things that I completely agree with Jennifer said is, you know, I think one of the things I've always, you know, think a challenge for us in the sleep field is that we've often, you know, have a provincial or fragmented perspective, and maybe that's part of being very local. And I think the thing that I enjoy most about society is the way we come together to join hands to really advance the field and help train the next generation and get some policy statements out that we could never have done through our own individual efforts or individual organizations. And just as one example, you know, and well, you know, just like an example of something that has just given me enormous pleasure has been the Young Investigator Research Forum. And for like years, you know, I think there was concern that we were not appropriately investing in training in that next generation. And, you know, the American Academy, you know, invested in ideas from board members and members and putting together this 3-day NIH partnership workshop that has now graduated dozens of people who are currently leaders in the field. And this wouldn't have happened if any one of us tried to put this forth without, you know, an organization we could work in. So that's just one example.
Great. Yeah, I have to say I'm a beneficiary of that program itself, so really appreciate that and the support of it. Dr. Aurora?
Yeah, so one thing that I think is really gratifying is you're so exposed to so many different ways of thinking and ideas at a much higher level of where the field can go, what needs to be needs a little bit of TLC, whether it's in, and then putting together the ability to put together something like yours when you see that there's a lack of resources or leadership in one direction, but the ability to share those ideas and that long-term vision across institutions across the country, across the world is just, I think, one of the most gratifying things I've noted, especially on the board. There were so many things that came up, so many novel things that I didn't even think about. And just having that exposure and you know, sharing those ideas has been really incredible and has just had the ability to make me see things more broadly and globally that I don't feel like I had before. And that's been incredibly gratifying for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, is not only the multidisciplinary nature of our field, but also it's many different viewpoints and a 30,000-foot view to be able to make that kind of impact that moves the field. Yeah, that's very gratifying. Balanced against that, obviously, there must be some unique challenges to this. We alluded to things like time management, but I'm sure that you have all encountered on your path various things that make this a bit more, or has its own unique difficulties compared to your other roles in academic or clinical capacities. Could you give us some ideas of some of the challenges that you face in your roles working within professional society?
Yeah, I can start this one. I think one of the things that I have found challenging and I'm seeing very differently now is how we navigate the interactions and relationships between academia and industry. They're all stakeholders. Everybody has something to offer. But I think, making sure that we do things in an unbiased way, but a way that really benefits everybody is challenging and, is a learning process. So I think that is one thing. And then, also understanding that when you're in this kind of professional society roles, leadership roles, you yourself have to be careful about how you interact with industry, even outside of the professional society when you're having other interactions, because you're representing the society at all times. So I think, it is challenging. I think we're doing a pretty good job of navigating. New issues arise every day that we didn't even think about. So I think that is one of the challenges when you get into this sort of level with the professional society.
Great point. I mean, obviously everybody's trying to benefit people in the long run, but what each person gets out of that relationship is certainly one that you have to be careful with. Yeah, that's a great point. Any other thoughts on the challenges that you encountered?
Yes. So I think the one thing, I'll be honest, because everything is challenging. Everything is not just a matter of a kumbaya kind of, episodes where we all come together and have a meeting of the minds. Although when that happens, it's a light bulb that goes on. But I would say that, both, the strength of these organizations is their diversity and the fact that we represent different aspects of the field. Sometimes, in terms of our, interests in research, clinical, patient care, public health, and as well as our disciplines, our upbringing, whether it's nursing, psychology, respiratory medicine. But those are also challenges because we have to come together and really listen carefully to not just what is our passion and our perspective, but really what is, everybody's perspective. And I think just a real challenge is how do you, how does you and everyone around you be thoughtful listeners to these multiple perspectives, and then ultimately balance competing needs. I'll be honest, one of the organizations I've been worked at, I was accused of talking too much about research. And that may have been true, I don't know. I didn't take it like that. I thought that was not a fair statement then, but maybe I was a little too focused on the things that really empower me. So I think that's another thing to think about is these organizations, even though they have sleep as a focus, under the umbrella of sleep, there's so much diversity. And as a society, you have to balance where you put your energies and your political capital. Are you going to fight for better reimbursement this year? Or are you going to fight for more NIH dollars? Or are you going to put it into training opportunities? So those are all the real life issues. So I'll just say that that's just a little reality that I wanted to share. It's part of the fun too, trying to figure that balance out.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is that opportunity for growth is active listening. We all recognize as I don't remember who mentioned it, but what you can bring to the relationship, but obviously what you bring to the relationship also has to be balanced against what others bring. And as you also highlighted, the ASM has its agenda. You are part of delivering on that agenda and hopefully crafting that agenda, but at some point you can't just come in and stomp around and make things change at your level. Again, you are working through the society to make these things possible. So yeah, all those relationship navigation issues are difficult, but certainly opportunities for growth. That's great. I love that. Dr. Martin, you have anything else to add to this one?
Well, I would add that this is what both of you said is perfect, right? There's an internal tension because we bring our whole selves to these things, but yet we're trying to do something that's for the greater good. And at times those two things are not at odds. What's best for you as an individual is not what's best for everyone else. And you kind of have to take a step back from that. But, you know, this is also a bit of an opportunity, but a challenge, but an opportunity. And that is there's an element of set shifting. So we all run our clinical work or our research programs a certain way, the way that we do it. And when you work with a professional society, you're coming into an existing structure. And sometimes I find it, you know, I have to sort of check myself, like, wait, no, that's not how this works. And I will say the different organizations that I've been involved with, the structure's a little different in all of them. The role of the board chair or the president, what the executive director does, what staff do versus volunteers do. So, you know, I think it's an opportunity to learn about different structures, but it can be a challenge. Like I said, especially like Susan, when you've been involved in a bunch of different organizations, they're not all the same. And so making sure that you understand the structure that you're in and who's supposed to do what within that structure, I think is important and can be tough actually to figure out.
Can I just get a quick follow-up on that one? So how do you navigate that? I feel like sometimes it's just sitting and listening long enough to realize, oh, okay, this is the pecking order and this is who does what, or sometimes
Yeah, I mean,
you know, you might run into a wall.
Asking a lot of questions and making sure when you sign up for something, you know what the expectation is for your role. And then, you know, Anisha referred to a few things about being on a board of directors. I mean, these organizations are nonprofits and there's actually laws that govern what board of directors members can and can't do. So making sure that you are aware of that and not necessarily even related to industry, but making sure that you know what you're getting yourself into and what the expectations are up front. And, you know, I mean, I think the core organizations in sleep are not the examples that come to mind when I think of this, but an organization that can't explain the structure to you might not be one where you want to invest your limited available volunteer time. Unless your job is to help them build a structure, because, you know, I think we all want to feel like when we volunteer our time with a professional society, we're making a contribution. And if the organization isn't well structured and organized, I think we end up feeling like we're investing more time than the value that the field is getting out of it.
I like that nugget, actually, before you jump in, Dr. Redline. I like that nugget of maybe a red flag, maybe an opportunity to actually, oh, maybe actually my role here is to organize this structure. So I love that little nugget there. Go ahead, Dr. Redline. I apologize for interrupting.
Oh yeah, no. What Jennifer reminded me of too is that one benefit of being part of some of the organizations is they recognize that they have a duty for their new board members to actually train them on how a board functions. And which is, you know, I don't think any of us in graduate medical school would ever learned anything like that. So in one, you know, for the ASM, I was lucky and fortunate enough to actually spend 3 days at the University of Tennessee at their board training and learned about how to balance the budget and, you know, all kinds of legal things that Jennifer referred to. That was really quite, you know, was a very, very interesting pragmatic skills. And not only I think is important for the organization and for your ability to contribute, but again, is expanding your own skills as a manager and maybe a communicator and maybe as an advocate.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things that I didn't anticipate in this discussion was looking for aspects about these professional societies that can be an investment in you in those explicit ways to develop those softer skills that aren't necessarily things that are obviously part of our day-to-day, but indispensable in our day-to-day. That's great. Very, very helpful. Shifting gears just a little bit, I in hearing not many of the stories, a couple of your stories on how you got to this position that you're in now, it seemed like you started at a smaller point. Obviously, they don't just dump you into the president or board chair role, but I don't know if you anticipated at that point where you were going or where you were going to end up in that society. So just in mind of the folks who are actually listening into this webinar, if you were giving advice to someone interested in getting more involved in professional societies, what would the advice be for those individuals to make sure that they're actually invested and actually able to grow to a position that you are in now?
Well, I think the first thing is volunteer. And if you volunteer, at least at the AASM, I mean, we have an incredibly engaged membership and we get a lot of volunteers every year. So if you volunteer and you aren't selected, volunteer again. The other thing I would say is that when you're just getting involved with an organization, perhaps as a committee member, or maybe you're reviewing grants for the foundation or something like that, it's kind of a way for you to decide whether this is a good fit for you. Because again, you have to do this because you love it. I think there's, I always tell people, don't do it just so you have something to put on your CV. Do it because you want to invest the time. It's an investment that requires active management, not passive management. But definitely put your name out there. I think a mistake that people sometimes make is they wait for someone to ask them. Most organizations have a call for volunteers. If they don't, they have an information email. Click on it and say, I'd like to get involved. How do I do that? So I think that's the first step. And then I think when I first got involved, I did not ever envision that I would be AASM president. That was not, I felt like the contribution that I had was in the space of sleep science, and I would help with the foundation and then I would go on my merry way. And for me, I think part of it was, I wasn't sure how I was going to fit in. I was the only non-physician on the board. I'll be very honest here. The AASM had never had a psychologist president. There had been 2 neuroscientists in the distant past, and I didn't envision myself in that role. However, I quickly learned that the AASM leadership is a very inclusive group, and recognized that there were strengths that I had that could make a meaningful contribution. So that's a great feeling to have when you're a part of an organization. But I don't know that you always know that in the very beginning. You kind of have to learn it by taking on small roles. Then, after you've been on a committee, volunteer to be a chair. After you've been a chair, maybe serve on a guideline task force. And then at that point, you'll know enough about the organization to serve in a leadership position.
Very helpful. Yeah. Persistent involvement is good for learning.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing, Logan, is that you don't volunteer to be on a committee and then put your name in to be on the board the next year. Very few professional societies work that way. Yeah. It requires you to really get to know the organization and for the organization to get to know you. And that just takes time.
Yeah, growing through the organization. Absolutely. Yeah. Dr. Aurora, you?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that Jennifer was one of the best presidents and a great leader. So that was an easy decision. But I think I want to talk about one point that I thought was very important that Jennifer, you brought up, which was about it's not just something to put on your CV. If you are really interested in this pathway for your career, one of the things I would recommend is that when you identify a committee or task force that sounds interesting to you, to actually reach out to people who have been on that or have some experience with that, to really find out what it's like and what they're doing, and to make sure it's aligned with your long-term vision for yourself on this pathway. Because if you're doing something you really like and love, and you're coming at it, like for me, it was guidelines. It's never going to feel like work. It's always going to feel like love. And I think that is the best pathway to natural leadership in a society, is to really identify and talk to people to really understand what the day-to-day looks like on that committee, and to make sure it's aligned with you. And I agree, just if you're not accepted the first time, keep trying. I mean, those are good brownie points, right? When you keep coming back and say, I really want to do this. So I think those are the 2 things I would say, is to really talk to people ahead of picking the committee or task force, and make sure that it is aligned with what you want to do, and what you kind of envision yourself doing long term in a professional society.
Yeah, these are fantastic comments. I'll just add something maybe obvious and practical. And, the other issue is that make sure that when you volunteer or accept, a new role, it's the right time for you too. Meaning that, it is a time that even with the passion and the professional and the alignment, you can travel. You could do the 3 times a year across country if that's what you have to do, or you can give up the evenings or the weekends. We all know that life does get in the way, and that we are on a road, and there are times in our life where, because of family or other reasons or other professional things that we have to take care of at home, we won't be able to give what it takes to be a productive committee member or etc. So, but that doesn't mean that next year or the year after would not be a good time. So I would just also say, we're on, our careers are a journey, right? And it doesn't always have to be at this minute. And I think in addition to everything that you heard, I would also just say, is the time right for you to give your full self?
I think that's an excellent point, and really ties together all of the comments that you all made into setting realistic expectations. Like looking at yourself and saying, is this something I want to do? Is it something I have the time to do, so that you can actually succeed and follow through, as had been mentioned before. To that point, even if it is a passion project, and even if you have the time and do dedicate enough time, I feel like sometimes we were saying individuals are not just doing this to put it on their CV, but even then it's sometimes hard to be recognized in academic centers or in other career facets to say this is something that tangibly contributes to my career development. So how do you ensure that there is that recognition of the work that you've done, the effort that you've put in, no matter how much you love it? At some point you have to be practical and say, is this going to help further my career, and how do I demonstrate that? How do I quantify that? And then tell it to my chair, tell it to the promotions committee, or tell it to my family to justify why I'm going to be gone. So how do you all quantify or justify the involvement, or demonstrate it to others?
I'm listening to a book right now written by an author named Simon Sinek. It's actually, he writes about leadership, and the book that I'm listening to right now is called Leaders Eat Last, which comes from a concept in the Marines, apparently. But I was just listening to this chapter where he was talking about work-life balance. And the point that he was making was that the best way to bring your best self home is to leave work happy. So if you are away for a weekend from your family and you come back happy, it actually, the data, he's a data guy, the data are that it actually is better for your family than if you work less, but you come home miserable. And for me, these kind of professional organization engagements bring me a lot of joy. And I think that it allows me to be a better person with my family because I like these things. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. In terms of your work life, I mean, one of the strategies that I've used is when I submit my dossier, I actually write about my volunteer work and how it is actually either positively reflecting on my organizations where I work. So for me, that's UCLA and the VA. Or if it's directly related to the research that I'm doing, or my teaching, or, some of the things that Susan mentioned. I mean, really calling that out and putting it down on paper so that the people evaluating you know what you're doing and the impact that it's having. So I think that, if you don't say it, they won't know. And it does, I think UCLA was pretty happy that I was AASM president. So, organizations do get credit for some of your accomplishments. So make sure that you list them.
Yeah, I could actually just say from being on several promotions committees that, individuals who have had leadership roles or contribute to guidelines. Those count a lot when it comes to promotion. My most recent promotion committee was a Harvard committee, which tends to be rough. But, I would say that being on these committees, and again, it gets pulled out, when you come up to promotion, identifies that amongst your peers and leadership, people recognize you as a leader and recognize you as responsible. And then, specifically, if through those leadership roles, there are tangible contributions, like you played a leadership role in a guideline or an initiative, those count a very long way in promotion committees. So again, these are, but again, I would sort of say this in the framework of emphasizing what we spoke about earlier. There are ways to really have an impact through these societies. And although you're not bringing in grant dollars and you're not bringing in clinical revenue, from a promotion perspective or a recognition perspective, you are doing important work. And I think that promotion committees recognize that if you could articulate these very concrete things, as well as the fact that these societies recognized you as a leader and someone who shows up. That was the other thing. You want to be able to do your job well on these committees.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jen and Susan really covered this well. I would say the only thing that I would have to add is to have very frank conversations with your division and department up front. If you're going to accept a role where, you're not going to get an FTE for doing this or RVUs, et cetera, just to kind of give them that heads up that this is important work. It's recognized work in your field, and also to have very frank discussions with your family that, I will be gone 5 weekends a year. And are you okay with that? So I think that really helps smooth things over and makes things transparent all around, to just have those very open discussions before you kind of embark on this journey.
That's very helpful context. Actually, building upon that, since oftentimes it sounds like support or coverage of your time is not there, right? You're not going to buy out some of your time, but you certainly need to be flexible with your time. How are those types of negotiations had to say, well, it is important, I've demonstrated that, but I also need to ensure flexibility because it's not always going to happen on a weekend. I will have to be able to be away, but I still want to make, I want to fulfill my 100% commitment to my organization or what have you, or to my family. How do you negotiate that? I think just as an additional point.
I can just speak to my own personal experience here. As foundation on, being on the foundation board and the academy board, even with the guidelines when we had to travel or be away, number one, I try to have meetings that are weekly or ongoing on my admin day. So I try to, make that accommodation. But also, sometimes, and again, this is part of the trade-off, right? Is the time and the commitment is do make up clinics. If I have to cancel a clinic on a Friday with, 20 patients, try to accommodate them on other days, because that's also an important part of what we do and who we are. And, we care about our patients and we don't want to not be there for them. But trying to sort of get that balance in your schedule that, you're going to be gone here, maybe here, open up an extra clinic, even a teleclinic. These are just some of the personal things, ways I've tried to accommodate. So that's sort of nuts and bolts advice that I can give. And I'll let Jen and Susan chime in.
Yeah, so being flexible to ask for flexibility. Got it. Great.
Yeah, and I think, I like this concept of the open communications, and I've also take a step back and think about what your boss's priorities are, and whether some of what you want to do actually links with their priorities. So if one of their priorities is, say, recruiting new faculty, perhaps volunteering for something related to career development could fill the need that you have and also help them because you'll be interacting with early career folks that might be candidates for positions. So understand what they need to accomplish and what their priorities are, and see if the work that you want to do might have some alignment. That would be one bit of advice. I think, you know, I went to a talk given by a very senior researcher in geriatrics, and he told this amazing, you know, the story of his life. And one of the things that he said, which just really stuck with me, is he said, blur the lines, right? He said, everybody thinks about there's like the work bucket and the volunteer bucket and the family bucket. And it made me think, I mean, to our last AASM event, I brought my 20-year-old daughter with me to Chicago. And while I was in meetings, she went out and goofed off, and we had dinner together at night. And what stuck with me about that is I feel like this whole volunteerism and professional organizations, it really is blurring the lines, right? It's something we do for ourselves, and it's something we do for work. Whether I think about it as work or fun or personal, I mean, I'm not so sure I can easily put it in a bucket. So I think that that's another thing to kind of keep in mind is there some alignment with, you know, either your family goals or your professional goals and the thing that you want to volunteer to do, and then talk about that. I think that could be a good strategy.
Yeah, I love the complementarity there, incorporating all facets of your life. Yeah, I love that.
I have really, I think I have very little, I think those are fantastic comments, but I think what I would just distill it as make everything a win-win, you know, just no one should lose.
Art of negotiation, exactly. Yeah, I love that. So on one last thought, before I let you all go, maybe an easy question, maybe a difficult question. Once you've reached the status that you have at these high levels in these organizations, where do you go from there?
Like we're retiring athletes or something?
I don't know. It's like what happens after president or chair? It's astounding. So yeah, what's next? What are you looking forward to as the next stage of professional society development, or even career, just generally?
Well, I think the great thing is that through this long journey, I feel like I've acquired a lot of skills that I now want to contribute in other areas. So as Susan was suggesting, I mean, you can always work with another organization. You can work with the organization that you are in a different capacity. Although I have to say that this year, after finishing my president year, mostly what I've been doing is writing grant applications, getting back to, which I guess is maybe related to the earlier question. You know, at the core of what I do is that I'm a researcher and a psychologist, and I put certain things on hold last year so I could commit a lot of time to the role that I had taken on. But now I have to actually get back to work. Although I do find that it's been fun to have a half a day free to write a paper. It's been a long time since I've had that. So, you know, I think that's, for me, it's going to be going back to the core of what I do every day, and maybe thinking about some new opportunities in maybe not even in sleep, but in other organizations where I could use the skills that I have.
The re-entry phenomenon. I love it. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
I think after a vacation, someplace nice,
true.
then yeah, I'm with Jennifer and the whole re-entry process. I think that sounds great. Getting back to sort of what we love to do on a day-to-day basis and why we kind of came this way anyways. So getting back to that.
Well deserved. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Dr. Redline had to hop off to another engagement, but I appreciate everybody attending both the webinar, if you're here virtually and signed in, but also to Drs. Aurora, Martin, and Redline. This recording will be emailed to all attendees next week, and I think it also gets posted for a more enduring asset if you want to check in back at a later time. The next and final upcoming webinar offered by the AASM Foundation on sleep research career pathways will be on federal agencies, and is scheduled for November 30th at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Registration will open soon. The webinar will feature researchers in federal agencies. So this is a webinar you don't want to miss out on, just like this one. So again, thank you, Drs. Aurora, Martin, and Dr. Redline, who is off doing more amazing things also in other societies. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.